Hiya, my name's Lucy Martin and I'm a second year student at the Royal School of Needlework studying a BA Honours in Hand Embroidery. I'm here today to introduce you to a brand new embroidery challenge for anyone of any skill level, whether you're a beginner in embroidery or an expert in embroidery. These times are very unusual and very strange, and I think it's really important to get creative, and I'm hoping that this challenge will really get your creative juices flowing, and it will also show some appreciation for our incredible NHS.
So the first stage of this project is to source your fabric. It can literally be anything from an old bedsheet or an old pillowcase, anything that you've got lying around the house that you can stitch onto. So the first stage obviously is to print off your template of our design, and then you're going to lay this on top of your fabric and then cut around the A4 piece of paper, which then I think it's really important that you leave a border at this stage because it will make the stitching in the next stage a lot easier. And then to make your life a lot easier, we're just going to press the fabric to get rid of all those creases. So the next stage is to trace your design onto your fabric. So I've gone for quite a lightweight cotton fabric so you can see the design through it. Whereas if you've gone for a heavier fabric, then you can always lay your design on the window and then pop your fabric on top and trace it straight off there, because it will make it a lot easier for you to see. So I'm just using a pencil, and you literally would just trace over the lines of the design, so then it's all mapped out for the next stage. So now we've got our design traced out. Now I'm using a rotating frame just because it makes it easier to film, and it makes it easier for me to show you what I'm doing. You don't have to use this, you can use whatever you want, or you don't even have to use anything at all. You can just stitch it on your knee. This is my colour scheme that I'm going to use. I've decided on a bright and bold colour scheme, but again, this is completely up to you and you can use whatever you want. So the first stage that I'm going to show you is how to start off your thread. So I've put a little knot in the bottom of my thread, and now I'm going to come from the top of the fabric and just pull it through so that the knot sits on top. Now this seems a little bit counterintuitive, but bear with me. And then we're going to do 2 little tiny stitches right next to it. Like so. And then you're going to take your knot and snip it off. This means that there will be no knot on the back and there will be no knot on the front either, which means that everything's just a lot neater. You don't have to do this, you can just leave the knot at the bottom. This is just how we are taught to start off our thread. So the first stitch that I'm going to show you how to do is a running stitch. So this is probably one of the easiest stitches to do. So you're just going to bring your thread all the way up and then decide on your stitch length. So my stitch length is going to be to the point where I've just done my little stab stitches so that I cover it. So you're just going to do 1 stitch going forwards. And then I'm going to come up roughly the same length as the stitch that I've just done away from the stitch, so that it creates a little gap in between. Pulling up, and then back through the fabric at the same width apart. So the next stitch that I'm going to talk you through is back stitch. So it's quite similar to running stitch, it's another outline stitch. And we're going to start it in exactly the same way. So you're just going to start off with your thread and pull it through with a knot on the end. Oops. And then, so the knot is on top, and then you're just going to do 2 little tiny stitches right next to it. Again, you can just leave a knot on the back, but you're just going to pop that then through there. Then taking your scissors, snip it right at the base. There we go, which leaves no knot on the front and no knot on the back. So we're going to start it off in, so I want my line to start here. So the stitch length I want is going to start here. So I'm going to come up, not from the start of the line, but as long as I want my first stitch to be. So we're going to pull the thread through, and then go back where you want your line to start. Now I want this to cover the stab stitches again so that you can't see it. So the next part is to do exactly the same thing. So to take the needle further away from the end of the first stitch you're going to pull it back through the fabric and then go back in at the end of the first stitch to form a solid line. So you're just going to keep coming back up and then back in, back up, and then back in. And you continue to do this for however long the line that you want to create, and this will form a more solid line, whereas your running stitch would have formed a dashed line. So the next stitch that I'm going to demonstrate is chain stitch. This one's a little bit more difficult, but still it's not one of the most difficult stitches. I've already started with my stab stitches in the corner, so I'm just going to bring my needle up through the fabric, and now I'm going to go back down the same hole. And then I'm going to pull my thread through, but not all the way through, keeping hold of it with this finger. Now I want to then come up a short distance away, but inside the loop. So then I'm going to pull up through the fabric, and as I pull, I should pull the thread, which will then form a little loop. Now you don't want to pull too tight, so just pull enough that you create your little loop. Now you want to then take the thread and go back down inside the little loop that you've just created. You're going to pull your thread through the fabric again, not pulling it all the way through, making your little loop, then come away a little distance away from your previous stitch through the loop, pull your thread through, pulling until it just tensions nicely against the thread. So then you're just going to go through again, back through the hole, don't pull it all the way through, come up and then pull back through your loop and then pull. So the next stitch that I'm going to demonstrate is very similar to the chain stitch that we've just done. It's just a little variation. Now it's called detached chain stitch, but it's also known as lazy daisy stitch. So I've done my little stab stitches and I'm going to bring my needle up through the fabric and then back down exactly as you would with a chain stitch. And then you're going to pull it up through the loop again. Now the difference is, rather than going back through the loop, you're just going to go on the other side of the loop and you're just going to catch that and pull it down. So it's just one little loop. Now this can be worked separately, or you can do it in a flower shape, which is why it's called lazy daisy stitch. So we're just going to create another loop and then come up and then we're just going to go on the other side of the loop and catch that down. So these look like little petals in a flower, which is a really, really pretty way of filling an area. So then we're going to pull the thread back through the loop and then catch that down. Now the other way that this can be worked, so that's a little lazy daisy stitch for you, is just as detached chains. So you can come up, go back down, come up through the loop and catch it down. And then it can be worked as individual little shapes rather than as a daisy shape. So back up through the loop and then we're just going to catch that thread and couch the little thread down. So the next stitch that I'm going to demonstrate to you is how to do a French knot. So I've done my little stab stitches and I'm just going to bring my needle through to the surface of the fabric. Now this one's a little bit more complicated. So you're going to take this thread in your non-dominant hand and then you're just going to use your needle and wrap it round twice. Now you're going to have to keep hold of the tension and slide your needle down and then pop your needle back in just a little distance away from where you started. Keep pulling and then pull it till your loops go to the base of the fabric. So then you're just going to pop your needle through and then just pull. Keep the tension with your left hand and pull it through and you create a little knot. So we're just going to go again. So pull your thread through to the surface of the fabric. Take the thread in your non-dominant hand. So if you're left-handed, then you'll be holding the thread in your right hand. Then you take your needle, wrap it around the needle twice, slide the needle down, reinserting it into the fabric, just I think a grain or two away from where you did your first stitch, and then you're just gonna pull it until it sits on top of the fabric and then push your needle through. So the next stitch that I'm going to show you is how to do fly stitch. So I've done my little stab stitches and I'm just going to bring my needle up through where I've done the stab stitches, and now I'm going to come slightly to the right of where I've done the initial stitches and then pull through, but not all the way through, just like chain stitch where you're not pulling all the way through. And then you're going to bring your needle into the middle of those two stitches to create kind of a triangle. So then you're just going to pull up through your fabric and then pull until you create a triangle and then attach it just as you did Lazy Daisy. So that is how you do a fly stitch. So you're just going to come do another one underneath, up, and then slightly to the right, down, don't pull all the way through, bring your needle up within the loop, pull until you get a triangle, and then pop the needle back through. So now we've just done fly stitch, I'm going to show you how to do feather stitch, which is using a very similar technique. So bring your thread through the fabric. I'm using the same thread as the one that I've just demonstrated the fly stitch in. Then I'm going to come back into the fabric slightly to the right, pull through but not all the way. Bring the needle up through the fabric and then pull. Now we're not gonna, so with the fly stitch where we've just attached that straight back down, we're now not gonna do that. We're gonna go to the right again to start another fly stitch basically. And then we're gonna come back up through the fabric in the middle to create a feather stitch. So the next stitch that I'm going to show you is how to do couching. So for this one you're going to need a thread to couch down and then a thread to do the couching with. It will all become clear. So the thread that I'm going to couch down is 5 strands of this blue, which I used for the back stitch. So, and then I'm going to use this pink thread for the actual couching itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down the thread that I'm couching along the line that I want to create. So I've already done my stab stitches in the colour that I want to couch the blue thread down with. So I'm just going to come up next to those stab stitches. Then I'm going to lay this blue next to it. And then I'm going to go over the top, coming back in next to the stab stitches and pulling tight. So I'm going to pull the blue as I do it, coming up, and you're literally just attaching the blue with the pink. So the next stitch that I'm going to demonstrate is stem stitch. Now this is probably the most well-known outline stitch. So I've done my little stab stitches and now I'm going to bring the needle up through the fabric and then set my stitch length, so I kind of want my stitches to be that long. And I'm going to pull back through, but not all the way again. And then I'm going to pop the needle back up through the fabric around half the distance of the stitch that I've just set. So I'm going to pull the thread through until the loop sits flush against the fabric. And then I'm going to go about halfway, so this halfway of this distance, so about here, and pull again, but not pull all the way through. And I'm going to come up where I finished the first stitch and pull through. So the next stitch that I'm going to show you is seeding stitch. This one's quite straightforward and it's just a series of little tiny stitches that go in random directions that all sit next to each other. So the last stitch that I'm going to demonstrate is laid stitch. So I've started with my little stab stitches. This is a really good filling stitch. So you're going to come up on the outline and then lay your thread down. And then it's easier sometimes if you actually pierce the thread as you go back down. And then you're going to come up right next to it. And then you're going to lay your thread down again. This one is a lot more time consuming than the others to fill an area with, but it can look really sleek if it's done neatly. And you're just going to pull and then you can go all the way around the shape with a filling stitch.